No, the free time stage isn't over. But one thing I am concerned about, and I won't quite get to the news end initially, I just want to talk a little bit about the software end, because this is something I'm concerned about. There was initially in late 90s, early 2000, there was a lot of interest in open source software. And I remember individuals would move, for example, when Movable Type had, announced they weren't as open as people had thought they were, huge groups moved over to WordPress. And there were some publications on people saying, WordPress is just not, Mark Pilgrim posted on this, WordPress, or Movable Type I should say, is not open enough. It was open but not open enough. And so what ended up happening was people who wanted to write custom code and make those kinds of adjustments, they weren't interested in Movable Type as much because they didn't have that control. WordPress, no problem, they could do what they wanted. So we had this brief flare-up where people were saying openness is critical. What's happened in the last 5 years though, that openness model has fallen to the background because we've misplaced, this is an early statement that Stallman mentioned, it was not about open or free as in beer, it was free as in freedom, as in liberty. And what happened now, many people are using a raft of Google sites, whether it's Gmail or Google Docs or whatever else. They're using Zoho, they're the podcasting services that will host their sites, Podbean and others. So they're happy to use free in a monetary sense, which is okay now, but it will become a significant issue because free in a monetary sense is not the premise for a suitable, sustained future in a content or in a publishing kind of a field. It has to be free as in access, free as in liberty. So to that regard, and I've been whining about this lately, Google has done a big disservice, I think, because if you want to get your email out of Gmail or, there are ways to do this, but it's not as simple as, let's say do an export out of WordPress to move your resource into a different blog. It's not. So those are some of the things that are frustrating me, is that a lot of educators now are starting to say we want zero cost instead, or they're not making that choice explicitly, right? They're doing it by the tools they select, by starting to rely on some of these tools that are not open source, but they don't have to pay to use them. So that's the backdrop that I want to get to answering your question. If I was talking to newspaper people, the way to ensure a healthy society and to ensure a democracy is for critical conversations to be in the open. If you start having conversations that are only accessible by certain groups of people or only accessible by certain people, then I think you start to undermine the notion of a free and an open society to a degree. It might not be catastrophic when it first starts to happen, but eventually we end up creating within content a social class distinction that we don't have right now in an open internet or in a partially open internet. There's already content being walled in, which would mean that in order to read the key information in Wall Street Journal, what has to happen? I have to have a certain level of economic status in order to pay for it. So, I fully understand why Wall Street Journal wants to make money, and I'm not sure how they will make money in the future. But I'm quite confident they won't make it by charging for content. What you're suggesting is that, and this is the same point I was making about the people who filter some of the information, who play that middle role. The content isn't the value point, but the commentary on the content, that could be a value point, right? That's something that people might be willing to pay for. They might be willing to say, I want to hear what Robin Good thinks about the fact that Skype, it might be, sold by eBay. What are the implications of that? And if I already have a strategy in place in my own company to use Skype, what should I be thinking about in order to not get blindsided by Skype? Well, that's different now. Now you're asking for someone to invest particular expertise and share a particular structured perspective on a subject. That's different than saying, should information about Skype's sale be available for free or not? In my eyes, yes, information should be free, but commentary, that is a slightly different slant, and this is something we could spend a long time talking about because, at what point does commentary become information that then ought to be free? But I think for you to say, I've spent a decade trying to stay on top of this field of, new tools, collaborative technologies. I've invested very heavily in a time perspective on getting, knowing what's going on. For you to then say, I will continue to share all the information, all the news about who gets sold, what's happening here, what's going on there, I will continue to make all of that available free for anyone who wants, because that is the premise of a reasonable, healthy society. And then for you to say, if you have contextually specific questions that I can answer to tap into my expertise, my wealth of knowledge that I've acquired over the years of following these trends, yeah, that is a value point. And that's the point earlier that I mentioned, like simply sharing information or content, it's not a point on which we can build an economic structure. Well, see, there's a distinction here. One is what generates value for content. What you're doing is you're generating value, you're adding value by putting physical effort in, right? You're taking time, you're doing something with this in order to create a product that is more contextualized to the needs of a particular organization, which is different than just simply making your content and information available for free. So I think the distinction I'm making is, if I post something on my site, it has zero cost to be reposted. Somebody can cut and paste that, and it's not like a book. A book had an input cost. We had to, buy paper. We had to print. There were people that operated the printing press. I mean, there was a value process created through the publication of a physical book. People were investing dollars in products and costs. When you do it online, the ability to duplicate content online is virtually zero. So then, getting back to the point I was making, for you to then find a value point, it has to be based on something that you're contributing time and effort in that can't be duplicated by cut and paste. And what you're suggesting is you're providing specialized commentary, you're providing a unique perspective, you're saying this is what's impacting this field, I'm picking out the important resources that are going to be contextually relevant to you as an organization. Is that a value point? Yes, it is. Pure information without that kind of commentary, that doesn't have an economic value point.